Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Urban League of Louisiana's Education Equity Town Hall. I'm Judy Reese-Morse, President and CEO of the Urban League of Louisiana, and tonight we are going to have an important conversation with the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Cade Brumley. We'll be talking about education equity, COVID-19, and what specific steps are being taken to close the achievement gaps for students of color in Louisiana. Later, we're going to be hearing from school board members in New Orleans, Lafayette, and Caddo Parish, as well as a couple of parents to get their take on the start of the school year and what education equity looks like to them in their respective cities. We'll spend the first 30 minutes or so with Dr. Brumley and the remainder of the town hall with our school board members and parents. If you have any questions during the town hall, please use the Q&A button to enter your questions, and I'll do my best to get to as many of them as time allows. As many of you know, the mission of the Urban League of Louisiana is to promote economic self-reliance, civil rights, and equity for African Americans and others. And we do this work through the lens of policy, social justice, education and youth development, workforce development, and entrepreneurship. For the Urban League, education equity is the frame around which we build our programming and advocacy, and it is what we believe drives transformation and addresses past inequities. We started a conversation with Superintendent Brumley in February at our statewide policy conference. We wanted to know how his office prioritizes equity and what parents, students, advocates, and others who care about equity should expect from the State Department of Education. Good evening, Dr. Brumley, and thank you for being with us.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Judy. Thanks for having me. And beyond that, just thank you for your continued advocacy and your passion, to see better outcomes for all kids across the state of Louisiana.
Thank you. This is a top priority for us here at the Urban League, and I know that it is important to the State Department of Education. So I want to start by asking you to share with us your vision for education equity. How do you define education equity? And I'll ask you to do that for those who weren't with us in February.
Yeah, look, I think it's about knocking down every barrier that exists for a kid to be successful, and also with a very cognizant recognition that some students, some communities, some educators might need additional or even differentiated supports. And so we just have to make sure that we're aligning our resources, whether that's our human capital, whether that's our dollars, whether that's our conversations, all of those things have to be aligned to make sure that we're driving those resources to where they're needed the most.
Dr. Brumley, I have to ask you about an article in last Saturday's Advocate reporting on the resignation of your Assistant Superintendent of Diversity and Inclusion in charge of the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Opportunities. Many of us were very hopeful that this office would really lead the work around closing the gaps and addressing disparities for students of color in Louisiana. Looking at your website, it says that the office is charged with leading and developing with equity in mind by ensuring that students are provided with the support, services, resources, and school choice opportunities needed to be successful as individual students. This includes the examination of procedures, policies, and practices that have created an equitable learning environment. The Urban League works with organizations and institutions to support them in addressing racial equity and creating environments for African Americans at all levels to succeed, but especially those charged with leading racial equity work. So this is very, very important to us. What can you tell us about the state of that office and the future of this work?
Yeah, Judy, thanks. It's a timely question. I'm certainly able to stand and answer the question. Understandably, I can't speak about personnel issues. Those are sensitive. But what you have to know is that we are committed to making sure every kid gets what they need. We created the office because we think it's important. And we are working through a transition now. We're working with our assistant superintendent from that position to get her advice, to better understand what the needs of that particular office might be so that it can be successful moving forward. We believe that, inclusion matters. We believe that diversity matters. We believe all the things that you just reported out matter for our kids across the state. So, whether it's operations that have prompted that resignation externally or internally, we're taking a look at it. We want to do better. We know that the state of Louisiana needs us to be strong and needs us to be advocates for every single child and educator across the state. We have a diverse workforce. We have leaders of color in key roles in our agency. And that has been a priority for mine, walking into the job and staffing those roles in that way, for a number of reasons. But I just think it's really important at the table to have those voices there. And so I maintain my commitment to that. We'll do better, and we'll move forward. I would share one thing, though, beyond just that office, Judy, is that, equity should not be isolated to a single office. When you're talking about equity of opportunity for kids, equity and resource or opportunity, diversity, inclusion, that's all of our work. We can't say that one office is solely responsible for that. So we just have to make sure moving forward that we're introspective. We look at the things where we need to look, we learn from that, and we get better together. And that's why I appreciate, Judy, the opportunity to come on and have conversation with you about these things tonight. We live in a very trying time for a number of reasons. And reasons like this are certainly high on the list. And I'm committed to working through those to get better.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say that this is still a priority for your office, for the department, and for the state of Louisiana, because it is a high priority for the Urban League of Louisiana. As I said, all of our work really falls within the frame of education equity. And as you know, we have done reports for New Orleans and Baton Rouge. We're looking at Shreveport and Lafayette. We are looking to complete these education equity reports because they do focus on all of the areas where there are gaps. So there aren't any secrets here. We know where the disparities exist, and we'll talk a little bit later about some other work that you have shared with the public recently that focuses on some of these same areas. And so I'm very interested in hearing again about the specific steps that you plan to take to do just what you just described. But you also wrote an opinion column a few months ago, I think it was. I think it ran in the Shreveport Times, or at least that's where I saw it. And it was around the social studies standards. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you said in that column and why you want the public to focus on social studies standards at this time.
Yeah, Judy, whenever we look at our student data, and rightfully so, we talk a lot about the fact that while we've had student-friendly policies in our state for some time, like we're not getting the results that our kids need and deserve. And we talk a lot about reading results and math results, but truly our lowest levels of performance on assessment are from social studies. And so a report was released a couple of months ago, and it said that Louisiana's social studies standards are mediocre and they need work to be more rigorous. And so the state of Louisiana has a policy, and I don't want to go into the weeds too much, but that every 7 years, different content area standards have to be reviewed. And our social studies standards are about 3 to 4 years overdue in that process. And I understand why. It's hard, it's difficult. Those are really tough conversations. And if you're in my seat, you're getting pushed in every single direction around what those standards need to look like. But I think it's important for our kids that we accomplish a few things, and this is what we spelled out at the beginning. Our kids need a story of their history that's accurate, that's truthful. It's one of the greatest things about America is that we should be able to tell, the places where we've excelled, but also acknowledge our flaws. And so they need a story and a history and a progression that makes sense, that is coherent. we need to make sure that we're including multiple historical perspectives in that story and not having those perspectives isolated, but making sure that we have a broad range of viewpoints in that story. And then the third thing is just we have to increase the rigor of those standards. They're not rigorous. We just read from the Fordham Institute that Louisiana standards are mediocre at best, and our kids deserve better standards. And so we are navigating this especially difficult political climate around social studies standards. And so, the easiest thing to do is just to say, no, we're not going to do it. They're already overdue. We'll just keep them overdue and we'll never touch it. But that's not what our kids need. Our kids need more rigorous standards. Our kids need standards that, look at history from multiple perspectives. And our kids need, social studies standards that are coherent and they progress in a normal way and they make sense. And so, yeah, I took time to write an op-ed because, look, I'm a former social studies teacher. This is what I originally, was my profession, was teaching social studies. And I knew we had weaknesses then and we had deficits and we have to make those better. And so we're embarking on this process. But what was happening is that some of the wind was being taken out of the actual work of making sure that we did have standards that made sense, that did have multiple perspectives, that were rigorous for our kids. And I just wanted to take a moment and say, look, here's the reason we're doing it. We also understand there's this nationwide conversation around critical race theory and its role in our schools. And I'm very much on the record of saying, that's not something for K-12. That's a theory from higher ed. And so let's leave that there. And let's focus on teaching our kids the complete history of America and an accurate history. And furthermore, the call out at the end of the op-ed, Judy, if you recall, was about getting involved at your local system level. Education is local. When we're talking about standards review process, and we'll ultimately adopt a new set of social studies standards, but curriculum is adopted at the local level. Teachers are trained at the local level. Oversight happens at the local level. So the op-ed was a call to action to community members and stakeholders around the state to say, get engaged at that local level and make sure that the things are happening in the way that they should.
So I'm really glad that you talked in more detail about what was in that op-ed piece. And you mentioned critical race theory, which, you ask every person what critical race theory means, and you are likely to get a somewhat different answer. But from the Urban League's perspective, it really is absolutely, it's a theory that really looks at the intersection between the law and institutional racism. And so my follow-up question to you is, how do you, as the state superintendent, practice equity and show leadership at the state level and acknowledge the institutional and systemic inequities that for many actually explain the disparities that exist for students of color today? How do you handle that? Because that is critically important to the Urban League and many of the people who are attending this town hall this evening.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we have been long challenged educationally in the state of Louisiana in terms of educational outcomes. Over the last year, even through the pandemic, we made the decision that we wanted our students to take a statewide assessment because it had been 2 years since we even knew where our kids were academically, and we needed that information. And so we had 98% of our students in grades 3 through 8 take our LEAP test. Which is, that's institutional to us now, that test here in Louisiana. And because of that, now we have a body of information for the first time in a couple of years. And so you might ask, well, then what does that tell us? And what does that have to do with this particular question? How's that relevant? Well, a few things. We learned that the state of Louisiana weathered the storm really well educationally compared to other states. If you look at our level of loss in terms of academics, and we have it, really it's about half of what we've seen in other states that have already released. And so we know that we weathered it well relative to other states. But what we also know is that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact in a couple of key areas. One of those being virtual learners. There's a 15-point difference in the academic outcomes of kids who were in school versus kids who are virtual. And we can even measure that along the way based on how often a kid was in or out of school. We know there's a disproportionate impact on students in the subject area of math. It's about double the impact of the fall in terms of English and reading. We know that there's a disproportionate impact on our youngest learners. Whenever we look at third and fourth grade, the impact is much more severe than we look at, say, seventh or eighth grade. And so knowing that, we also have to assume that same thing is true with students who are in kindergarten, first and second grade, where we don't even assess. And then finally, we have disproportionate impact, I think, on some of our student groups, whether it's students of color, students who are economically disadvantaged, or students who are English language learners, or a combination of those things, including students with exceptionalities. So it's now our responsibility, both at the state level to lead a charge out, but also really at that local level where so much federal resource has flown in to make sure that we are addressing those things specifically. And so on tomorrow, we're going to release a campaign, and it's called, I would ask Judy that the Urban League would sign on to this, but it's called the Louisiana Comeback. And what we're asking systems from throughout the state to do is focus on a few key areas over the course of the next 10 months, and to make sure that their resources that they've received from the federal government align to those key areas over the next 10 months, so that we can come back as quickly as possible. And systems can't just say, well, we have the money, we're going to treat every kid the same, we're going to treat every employee the same. We have information now. We have information from 98% of our kids in third through eighth grade. And it is critically important that whatever planning that systems were doing between over the last few months, now that they have this information, those plans need to be tweaked. And we need to make sure that we are, from an advocacy standpoint, working with our local school systems, working with our charter partners, working with educators across the state to make sure those resources are being used appropriately. And so we're going to post academic planning on a state website. We're going to post a financial transparency dashboard, so you can go in and look where your local systems are investing their money. And that's going to tell you a lot. And it's going to tell you what they think are the most important things to help recover from the ongoing pandemic.
So you've said quite a bit. I want to go back to some of the things that you've talked about. You talked about the LEAP scores. And yes, we absolutely have seen that the students who were in class outperformed students who had to use distance learning this past year. What are you thinking about as we now are starting a new school year? We're still in a pandemic. The numbers are absolutely trending in the wrong direction. And you may have students who are unable, because of health reasons or other reasons, they're unable to appear in class at school. What considerations are you giving to those students? And can we expect something different in terms of testing for students who may not be able to be in person?
Look, it's hard for me, and I'm never going to disconnect the fact of I'm a dad, and I have kids that are going through this just like parents across the state. And so the way that I know that parents are dealing with this and the emotion behind going back to school in a normal year and that being heightened, and once again, going back to school in a COVID year is very real and personal to me. What we know is that last year we were able to be successful across the state in having kids in in-person instruction. Now that did mean that we needed to make sure that we had the right distancing in place. Last year we had masking in place. We had sanitation that was increased. We did all the right things. In fact, when the CDC released their guidance, it was an affirmation for what was happening in Louisiana. I know the Delta variant's different, and I know that it impacts in a different way. But I'm in constant communication with some of the greatest medical professionals across the state at the Louisiana Department of Health, as well as some of the healthcare organizations in some of the largest cities around the state, whether it's Children's Hospital or Ochsner's. And those individuals, those pediatricians, those epidemiologists, they're telling me they believe we can have a successful school year. We just have to make sure that we have the mitigation efforts in place. But look, we have to be nimble. If we see a shift in this virus, we have to respond. But I think we also have to recognize that there are tremendous impacts from our kids not being in school as well. And we know that has played itself out as we look at the information we've gathered and the difference between our virtual learners and our learners who are fully in person.
Sure.
And what Judy, what I am really concerned about outside of those disproportionate impacts is we don't assess right now in K2. So we don't truly know where those kids are. We know that over the last 3 years, reading proficiency in K3 has fallen consistently every single year. So we already had a challenge that our administration is going to have to make better and improve, and we're committed to, and our literacy work. But we have to go into this year assuming that our K2 learners have experienced significant decline in learning that has to be recovered and then accelerated. And that's why this comeback campaign matters, because we have to make sure we're spending our resources in the right places so that we recover our kids and accelerate as quickly as possible. Louisiana doesn't have room to get this wrong. We've been long challenged educationally, and we've been long challenged in student groups. And so we have an opportunity to recover and accelerate. And that's what we're going to be calling on local leaders and local communities to help us do that.
So I want to go back to the question about what your department is going to do to make accommodations for those students who are not able to appear in school.
Yeah.
The data is very clear, and you've just run us through it. I don't really think it is a big surprise to many. It was a struggle for just about every family that I know of to deal with distance learning, as for teachers, as for administrators. So a struggle for the entire system. But what exactly are you considering, and what considerations would you make for those students who are just not able to be in class, because we know that is where a lot of the disparities exist? Yeah.
And I think you're asking specific to the testing cycle, and my response to that would be, we will make accommodations this upcoming year as needed. Look, last year we made accommodations that had never been made. We did extended testing windows, so we opened up that testing window for an elongated period of time. We did remote testing. We did waivers for weekend and afternoon testing. And so we listened to our systems and we said, what do you need from us? And we tried to accommodate on our end to make those things possible. And that's how we got to that 98% participation rate, which is one of the highest in the country. And so, I hesitate to say, we'll do that all the same this upcoming year, because we don't know what will happen. But those are some of the things that were requested last year from various systems. And those are things that we tried to accommodate. And so was that the case in every single system? Maybe not, but we tried to accommodate the needs of individual systems as they asked for support.
You also, Dr. Brumley, mentioned some of the key areas that are important to the Urban League of Louisiana as we look at systems change work. We talk about education equity, and again, what does it really mean? Well, it really means looking at students who are disadvantaged because of disparities, looking at the gaps between white students and students of color as an example, and really figuring out how to close those gaps. So for us at the Urban League, we use an education equity framework that follows the data, and it takes us directly to third grade reading, eighth grade math, high school graduation rates, how to develop and retain high quality teachers. Many of those same data points are in your priorities plan. And so I'd love to hear from you exactly what steps you will be taking, working with district leaders across the state to really get at these specific areas and to try to close some of these gaps.
Yeah, Judy, I hate to go back to it, but I am strong enough to do it. That's one of the reasons why I hate the news of the resignation and the article that came out and the work that we have to do. Because so much of the work that we are doing is equity-driven work around things that really matter, like early childhood education, around making sure that every teacher has a teacher of quality in their classroom, of making sure that we have increased access to dual enrollment, like of pushing in on literacy. And these are things we have actively worked on during a very difficult year. So we haven't just tried to, make it through the year and keep kids healthy and employees healthy and safe. We have been active in trying to put forward policies that make us better post-pandemic. And so, again, we have work to do. And I admit that we're going to figure that out and we're going to get better. But some things really have to matter for the conversation. And I would say one of those being early childhood education. It is the most critical and most important educational challenge of our generation. Only 40% of students come to school kindergarten ready. 40. And in some of our more challenged communities or more impoverished communities, that number is significantly smaller in terms of the number of kids who are coming to kindergarten ready. So we have to continue to advocate and be aggressive in our advocacy around making sure that we have a spot for every kid in terms of early childhood education. We are building broad consensus around that. I think that people more than ever believe that to be true, but now it's making sure that we have the purse to be able to fund that. So I talk about that. We've done a great deal of work over this last year around literacy. We are going to make sure that we provide every teacher, K-3, and every administrator across the state training in the science of reading. Actually learned the importance of that during a walkthrough visit at one of the schools in New Orleans and the impact that they've had from that training. We are aligning accountability systems to make sure that we give equitable access to dual enrollment and making sure that's available for students. We're making sure that we are valuing career and technical education at the same level as university preparation. We can't just say we believe in career and technical education and then not make sure our systems align to that. So we're doing that. And then we really have to look at the teacher pool. We don't hear a lot of people saying, oh, I want to go be a teacher. And our biggest recruiters, frankly, should be other teachers. And so if they're not saying that to people who should be or could be a teacher, we've got to work on that. And I'm committed to trying to increase the teacher pool, but not just increase the pool, but to try to increase quality, because if we improve our teaching practices, we improve student outcomes. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to partner together. I know we have already on literacy and dual enrollment and some other areas, but sure hope that we can keep that conversation going.
So I want to ask you another question, and then I want to take some of the questions that have come in. We have quite a number of questions, and I apologize. I know that we will not have a chance to get to all of them, but I do want to get to some of them. But before I get to the questions that have come in, I want to ask you what one or two areas as it relates to education equity, as we've talked about this evening, are you asking school district leaders to focus on? The way we think about it at the Urban League is if we can get our arms around some key areas that we all agree on, and we can all put our focus and our emphasis on those areas. Of course, one of them for us will always be, how do we address systems? How do we bring about changes in systems that are based on historical inequities and really use those and use that change to close the gaps? But what are some of the areas that you talk to district leaders about, and what are you encouraging them to focus on as it relates directly to education equity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to limit it to 2 or 3 because I can very specifically tell you what we're going to begin asking them to do tomorrow. And I've previewed that with them. And so our comeback plan is really around 3 different buckets. The first being attendance and well-being. So making sure that we are re-engaging families and students into the school system, because we lost so many students and families last year as a result of hurricanes and the pandemic. So, re-engaging families and students, and then making sure they're well whenever they're there. Looking at trauma-informed care, looking at increases through the stimulus dollars for additional counselors and social workers. I don't think it's about buying a program in terms of well-being for a student. I think it's about people who are qualified to do the work and staffing those people as quickly as possible to work with kids, and also making sure our employees are well. We launched at no cost online virtual therapy options for teachers and educators across the state last year. We're going to keep that going. The second thing, Judy, is acceleration and recovery. We're going to really be leaning in on tutoring. That includes tutoring at schools, but we're also going to be providing vouchers for parents to, be able to make some choices around private vendors if they want to get their kids some additional support. We're going to be encouraging after school and before school programming. And we're going to be at the high school level talking a lot about graduation planning. We're in our third year of COVID, and we have to make sure that every student has the courses that they need for the next step. And there wasn't anything missed. So we're going to be investing there. And then the third piece is just around professional learning for teachers. That goes to looking at making sure we have functioning leadership teams at every school, making sure that teachers have access to teacher leadership partners, whether they're master teachers, mentor teachers, instructional coaches, and then ensuring that our teachers in our younger grades have the opportunity to participate in training around the science of reading. And so all of those things we think allow us the opportunity to, if we're able to keep our kids in school, come back as quickly as we possibly can. And I think that quick comeback is really important for our youngest learners, or some of our student groups who need that the most. But these aren't things we're just making up. Like the research tells us, tutoring really helps. Before and after school programming helps. Couple that with mentors, making sure that kids have access to counselors and social workers. That matters. Engaging families. And so we're trying to encourage and advocate that systems invest their dollars there.
Let me, Dr. Brumley, go to a couple of questions that we've received. We've talked about learning loss from the LEAP scores. This is a question, but there's no information on the Department of Education's website on how many kids opted out last year because of COVID. When will that information be posted so we can know how those students have been affected and what their overall scores are?
Yeah, so I think there are really two different questions there. The first being around participation rates. So as I shared, our 3 through 8th grade participation rates on LEAP were about over 98%. So that means 2% of students roughly, well, not even 2%, but a little under 2% of students throughout the state opted out or did not participate in statewide testing. So that number is less than 2%. The second question I think that is being asked is around school performance scores, because I saw someone mention, do kids get zeros? And so that is a separate conversation that has to happen at our state board level around school performance and letter grades from this last year. But we do know that we had over 98% of our kids in grades 3 through 8 take the LEAP assessment.
One more question about critical race theory. You said you believe that this is not for K through 12. Our question is, does that mean that only students taking AP or college courses would have the opportunity to grapple with such complex social constructs? Do not all students deserve to be able to critically think and have dialogue as this conversation is being had across the country? Yeah,
I mean, for one, I'll go back, to my statement. I don't think critical race theory as an absolute truth should be taught in K-12. It is a theory. I believe it, originated in higher ed and it has a place in higher ed. What we have to do in the question is differentiate between critical race theory and critical thinking. We also have to make sure that we're not being inclusive of things like diversity and inclusion and equity, and making sure kids are emotionally well as part of that conversation. And so, yeah, we absolutely need to make sure that we're developing critical thinkers. But whenever we're talking about critical race theory, which in and of itself is a name theory that originated in higher ed, I just think the best place for that remains higher ed.
I think we just got someone who said not only is it not being taught in K through 12, it's not being taught in college either. And again, my last word on this, and there's much more to be said about this. We probably are going to have another conversation in the future about critical race theory, but then also what the theory focuses on, again, which is the changes that need to be made in institutions because of, in my opinion, inequities that are not to be disputed. We know that there are inequities in systems in education and housing and banking and finance. These are facts that, in my opinion, are not up for debate. And so we have to really talk about how we help children and students to understand the full history. And that's the challenge. I think that's where leadership really matters. How do we help our students to understand these complex issues that are a part of our country's history, and at the same time work to make those changes? And so we'll talk more about that here at the Urban League. And I appreciate you, Dr. Brumley, for being very direct and straightforward with your position. We may not agree on everything, but we are always open to discuss and to share our thoughts and to look for opportunities to work together where we can. And for us here at the Urban League, that is always going to be focused on closing the gaps. This is not rocket science. We know that there are disparities that exist. We know that there are gaps in the system. If we focus on where those gaps are, we know early childhood, as you said, extremely important. 3rd grade, 8th grade, ACT scores, high schools, quality teachers, attendance rates. We know where the gaps are. And so then the question becomes, how do we work together in order to address those gaps? And so my last question for you before you leave us, and again, thank you so much for being with us this evening. The last question is, what would you say is the most important thing that residents, that advocates, that school leaders, business leaders, faith leaders, what can each of us do, and what should each of us do in order to address the inequities that exist and to really promote equity in education?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're asking that question, and the first and foremost is making sure that our systems have safe practices to resume school. You know, we have to make sure that, you know, they have the sanitation needs that need to happen. We have to make sure that they have the mitigation practices in place, and I feel and think that they do. But that is first and foremost. Beyond that, you know, we talked about a lot of things that matter: early childhood, literacy. You know, I talked a lot about, you know, my belief that families should have the opportunity to pick and select a school that makes sense for them, making sure that we have teachers of quality available for all of our students. And we know that in some of our more challenging schools, that's where we need some of our greatest teachers. And we need to work on that together. But what I would say is, Judy, knowing that, you know, I want to partner with you. I want to partner with those that support you. And I want to help close those barriers, because the things that you care about in terms of closing those barriers are what we're trying to do. And I'm going to need your advocacy and your support around those things. And I'm thankful to have it. And then I'll just close out by saying, education is local, and get involved at your local level. Talk with your school board members. You know, you have some strong school board members. Talk to them, talk to your school leaders, talk to your principals, see what they need, and see where you can support them. Because again, Louisiana has been long challenged educationally. I am very optimistic that we're going to get better. And I'm thankful for the support of the Urban League and others for helping us do that.
Dr. Brumley, I want to thank you for being with us this evening, for sharing your perspective and your opinions about equity in education throughout our state. Back to lastly, the social studies standards conversation. I know there's a meeting coming up in September. Do you want to just tell us quickly about that? Because I want everybody who is participating to tell 10 other people that they know about this opportunity to share their thoughts about what should be included in our social studies standards.
Yeah. Judy, I'll share this. The steering committee will meet and look at draft standards at the end of September. We want to make sure that the working groups, who are teachers who are writing these standards, volunteering over the course of their summer to write these standards, had the time to be able to incorporate feedback. The steering committee will meet again at the end of September, but I'll do you one better than that. We're going to take every single standard after they're ultimately adopted by the steering committee, whatever that looks like, and we're going to post every single standard by grade level online. And so that the public across the state of Louisiana will have the opportunity to go online and provide feedback on each individual standard. And then we're going to take that, categorize that, look at that, And so that'll be another step that we have as we take those standards to our state board so that they can make an informed decision. So really, really get involved. I'm appreciating that the fact that you brought it up because we need feedback on what's important. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brumley, Dr. Cade Brumley, our State Superintendent for Education. We appreciate you being with us this evening, and we will wish you a good evening.
Thanks, Judy.
And now we will transition to our panel discussion. Very, very, very excited about this panel discussion and having the opportunity to be able to talk to school board members and parents to get their thoughts and their ideas and perspectives. I want to ask all of them with us if they would activate their cameras and join us in this conversation so that we can keep it going and keep talking about what's important and what matters. So I want to introduce the school board members that are with us, starting with, this is an alpha order, Ethan Ashley, who is the president of the Orleans Parish School Board, Kenya Cohen, who is a parent and advocate. Kenya is also, I'm proud to say, an alumni of the Urban League Pride Academy. And for those of you who are not familiar with what the Pride Academy is, go to our website, urbanleaguela.org, to learn about it. If you're a parent, you should definitely be familiar with it. Jasmine Green, who is the first vice president of the Caddo Parish School Board, Danielle Gray, another parent and advocate, and also another Urban League alumni, and Mary Morrison, who is the president of the Lafayette Parish School Board. I want to welcome all of you to this conversation. I know that you all listened to what Dr. Brumley had to say, and I'm wondering if there are any just general responses to some of the things that Dr. Brumley talked about as it relates to education equity. And I think I want to start at the end. Let's start with Mary Morrison. What were your thoughts, Mary? You're on mute, Mary.
Thank you, Ms. Judy. Dr. Brumley talked about community, and that is one of the things that we're doing in Lafayette Parish. What we have done, all of our low performing schools, we have developed, we call it a transformation zone. We have hired a director to work with our schools that are in the transformation zone. And not only that, where it relates to the community, we have something called CAFE. It's called Community and Family Engagement. And so we have a host of retired teachers, parent advocates, working together with the teachers and the schools to see what is needed in these schools to move them forward. Also, we have an organization called Love Our School, which we partner with. We have our pastors that we work with to reach out to students and parents within the church organizations. We was thinking that just about everybody goes to church, we can kind of reach them in that area. So those are the types of things that we're doing. We have a lot of community members that are pouring their money and their time, but actually our retired teachers, our teachers, going into the communities and trying to reach out to them to help them, because you know that we have young parents. They are challenged with raising kids. Most of them it's a single parent home. They have a lot of challenges, things that you or I never even dreamed of. So we have to be, logical and think these things are going on in the homes, and how do we reach these parents to assist them? And so that's what our community is doing, coming together in any way that we possibly can to help them and support them, community, church, retired teachers, the whole 9 yards. So
Thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank
you.
That's
that's really helpful. We're really excited to have you with us this evening to help us put a lens on what's going on in Lafayette. I want to go to Ethan next, the president of the Orleans Parish School Board, and ask you if you have any initial thoughts about what Dr. Brumley shared about his focus on education equity. Is it what you are expecting, or would you like to see more?
Judy, listen, as a former Urban League employee, I think you and I are probably more aligned than not. And, I just expected more from Dr. Brumley. I'll probably be the first one to say it. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm elected, not by Mr. Brumley. I serve the Orleans Parish School Board and the district here in New Orleans. And I just expected more from him around critical race theory. Now, look, I only have my Juris Doctorate. I don't have my doctorate degree. But, when you talk about a theory that we know is so, I think, important to the history of Louisiana and the work that we have done, right? I think you have to be clear about what we want to see for the learning of our young people. And critical race theory, I think, is one of those things that we need to be sure that we're talking about, that we are teaching, that we are elevating to a conversation, and not just simply, I think, having a boilerplate answer as if we are on a national stage. I think getting whatever rhetoric we're getting from the right or the left and giving an answer. But look, that's going to be my quick answer. I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to talk a little bit more. I expected more from Dr. Brumley, and I'm sure him and I can certainly have more discussion about this in the future.
Okay, good. No, thank you, Ethan, for your perspective. That's what this panel discussion is all about. Let's go to Jasmine Green, representing Caddo Parish, the school board there. Welcome, Jasmine, and tell us what your thoughts are. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. I thought Dr. Brumley did okay. However, there are some more discussions we have to have, period. Some other things that I was happy he said is that he will sit down and try to have these conversations. Most superintendents I've seen in the past haven't even tried to have the conversations. So at least he wants to put forth an effort. And I mean, I want to hold him accountable to what he said. If he says he wants to have the conversations, we definitely need to have them, because during this COVID time, we need all of the resources and the help that we can get for our kids that are in poverty, our kids that really need that extra push, especially in my district, when it comes down to their education. So, with him, and then I guess I have to give him, he kind of just got the seat maybe a year ago. And he's had to hit the ground running during this COVID time, the COVID challenges. But, he has work to do as well as everybody else. But I'm willing to have those conversations with him that need to be discussed.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that. Danielle and Kenya would love your initial thoughts, and also want to ask you to tell us what your thoughts are about where we are in this pandemic. You both have children that are in school. I'd love to know what your thoughts are, what your concerns are, and what you are expecting from your school leaders as we start another school year in the pandemic. Danielle, let's start with you.
So basically, my concern is safety. I'm worried that my son is going to get infected by COVID. I'm looking at the numbers. I work in a clinic, especially with infectious disease. I'm a medical case manager, so I see what's going on. I see the numbers. I wish that the school system had more communication wise. If we had more communication, I think a lot of parents would feel better about the situation and what's going on. And far as education wise, during COVID, I experienced it head on, how far behind we are as a school system, or, with everything was going on. So this should have been a big, huge teaching moment, to where we reevaluated and looked at everything. And I'm not just talking about the schools, I'm talking about with parents and everything. So so that we can come together for the kids, to better them and help with the resources. So, and as far as with Dr. Brumley, um, I agreed with him with some things, but the critical race theory, I think it needs to be taught. But like I said, you can't expect Dr. Brumley to understand and what that means, because he's not actually, I hate to say it, he's not a Black person. He really doesn't know, what we go through or what our kids are going through right now. So he really doesn't sit in our seat to know what actually is going on. So but I like the fact that he wanted to work with the Urban League to partner up and help solve some of these issues.
Thank you, Danielle. Kenya, jump into this conversation. What are your thoughts? What did you hear? What would you like to see? What do you need to know as your children get ready to return to school?
My baby actually started Friday was her first day, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm very scared. I'm scared of the fact that she knows about the education about wearing her mask. But even when she went to school today, she came home and said that she couldn't walk in the hallways because it was still like a group of people. So it kind of scared her. And I asked her, I said, well, did they have on their mask? She was like, yes, ma'am, they had on their mask, but it was still too many people crowded up. So that, just listening to that kind of made me afraid. Like, no, they're supposed to be 6 feet apart. Like, that's not supposed to happen like that. But as far as Dr. Brumley, I agree with Miss Danielle. I think he doesn't have a clue. Like, he's getting there, but he's not there. And also when I heard him talk about inclusion, that was something else that really like kind of turned me off from his conversation. It's like he know, but he really don't know what's going on. The inclusion and the race, those are two things that are very important, to our people of color.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about what we should be expecting this upcoming school year. And I'd love to hear from our school board members in each of your cities and where you lead. Kind of what are your concerns? What are you thinking about? What lessons did you learn from last year running a school year during the pandemic? Kind of what is top of mind for you? And this time we'll start with Jasmine, please.
Well, what's new to us is we haven't started school yet, so we're still putting some things in place. But we have a social emotional curriculum that Caddo just is implementing now. It's for every student, and it's supposed to be one of the top curriculums in the states. So I'm interested to see how that will turn out. Also, we're doing, for safety purposes, we're doing the COVID testing for every single school. So I was happy to see that, being put in place, as well as things that we have learned from last year, as far as the data that and the research that we've found from last year, how kids were so far behind. And our staff was able to implement extra time to put into our maths and sciences and Englishes. So we can catch our kids and get them up to par, because when 2020 of March, we had to stop school then, and right then and there. So now we've had to, our kids lost a lot during that time. So now we're having to catch them up. So us being able to implement these extra minutes into our maths and Englishes, and giving our teachers the data that they need to make sure that our kids are ahead, or not ahead, but definitely on target for graduation and the point that they're supposed to be. So, this year it's going to be another challenge. Also, we've put in place Freshman Academy, where our freshmen will be able to come in 2 weeks before school starts. So, because we don't want to waste one single minute. So they'll be able to learn, where their classes are, little small stuff, where the lunchroom is, so that they won't waste any time when it comes to next school year. Also, and I'm going to move on. I know someone else is eager to talk. Also, I lost my thought.
All right. Well, it'll come back to you.
It'll come back to me.
It'll come back to you. It always does. I just hope it comes back to you
I'm sorry.
while we're together, because sometimes the thought comes back and
my mind's going. It's moving 100 miles an hour.
No, thank you for sharing
Yes, ma'am.
what's happening in Caddo Parish. Ethan, what's up in Orleans Parish?
Thank you for the question. And I think my colleague, Board Member Green, spoke so eloquently about the challenges I think we're facing across the state of Louisiana. It's not unique to, I think, Caddo. We also, we're certainly dealing with the pandemic, the global pandemic that has continue to ravish our district. But before I jump in there, I have to acknowledge that I am one of 7. I see some of my colleagues on here, and I just want to acknowledge my board member Nolan Marshall, my board member Carlos Zerbagon. They've done an excellent job serving with me, and I want to acknowledge them because, again, I'm one of 7, and so the work that we're looking at in this moment is really keeping. The first thing is keeping students safe, students and our educators safe. The second thing is trying to make sure that we curb the learning loss that we know took place last year, which means that we got to try our darndest to keep kids in school, which means that us as adults have to do everything that we can for those youngest students who don't have the opportunity in this moment to be vaccinated, my son included, who's 10. And so I just want to make sure that I state that. The second thing, I think, and it's been eloquently stated across the board, is mental health services and making sure that we are able to adequately support students and staff in this moment. And the last thing I think is on our mind is stability of families, making sure that as we know federal monies and things start to shift a little bit, that our families who find themselves on unemployment as the new variant starts to ramp up, that we're able to stabilize them, because unstabilized families make it much harder for our teachers and our leaders to be able to educate young people. And that's like top on our mind. So I'll pause there and let my other colleague, Ms. Morrison, jump in.
Yes, one of the things I really was impressed with last year at graduation were our counselors work with our students so they know exactly where they are before graduation. Do you know that we work with kids up until the last day? We do not print the program. And what it does for our students, because sometimes when you lose them, they don't come back. So I think that's an effort to, bring them where they need to be, especially if they're just missing minor things. And it could be accomplished by taking a test or doing an assignment. So that's a great thing. We also just approved over 200 early childhood seats for children to apply for. So I think that's going to help us as well. We have partnered with Lafayette Consolidated Government, LPSS, with their transit system, where kids could have a job or get to where they need to be, and we pay a fee every month. So that's something great that we're doing. We're also partnering with Oshner Lafayette General and Our Lady of Lourdes to offer testing. One thing that our teachers are not happy with, because we kind of pull back on their COVID days. As you know, we would give like 10 days if they were exposed or whatnot. And we just want to encourage people to wear your mask, practice social distance, so that you can be in the classroom. And we talked about the teacher shortage, so you could do these things and get vaccinated. No, I can't make anybody get vaccinated. I can't make a child get vaccinated. All children has to be approved by a parent. A parent have to sign off on that. But it kind of makes you think, if you just have those 10 days just out there, it's like, oh, you kind of, not really doing what you're supposed to do. And I'm not sure, but just things like that we're trying to accomplish so that our kids could learn better. But we are really pouring in time into our community, really doing that, because Dr. Bumley, as you said, some things that we wanted to hear, we did not hear. So it's kind of up to the community to see what we can do to bring our kids to where they need to be.
I see a lot of, I'm sorry, Mary,
Let's
please.
go. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Judy.
No, I was just going to say, I see a lot of head shaking from our parents, and I really want to make sure that we hear from them because they're representing the voices of the individuals that we all serve. So Kenya, let's go back to you. What's this sounding like to you? Do you think that we are going to be able to have a successful school year where students and teachers and administrators are safe and protected, and we can address some of these gaps? We talked about that earlier. There are a lot of gaps between white students and students of color. And so how do we do that? What did you learn? What have you learned since last year going through the pandemic? And share some of maybe your lessons or your tips with some of the parents and others that are listening.
Well, I like what Ms. Morrison said about how they helping the parents. A lot of times, I know I'm an educator as well. I work with special needs students at a Head Start center. A lot of times the parents think it's the teacher's job to teach, when all in actuality, it's supposed to be a marriage between the two. I don't expect for a teacher to teach my child anything. I expect for her to reinforce what I'm already teaching. And it should be the same way with me trying to reinforce what she's teaching. If she give her the 2+2, then I can bring it to Walmart and say, well, this is where the 2+2 comes in. But they have to work together. I wish that they would have more parent centers here, like Ms. Morrison is doing in her school, because a lot of times teachers expect for parents to know things that we don't know. I'm in my 40s and I'm just learning financial literacy. So how can I teach that to my child if I never was taught? It's certain things that's in our household, even African Americans, that we just don't talk about. Sex, finances, those are things that just not talked about in households. So it has to be some way where somebody is teaching us. I was in foster care. Who was going to teach me? So I really like that she's implementing that family, situation into the schools. That's something I would definitely like to be a part of. And also learning about Urban League. Just matter of fact, I was walking up the street, and that's how I got involved with the with the parent, with the pride meetings. Just walking and just like, well, what's this building? And that's how ran into a person there, and it was like, oh, we could hook you up with this and hook you up with that. But what if I wasn't walking up that street that day? Then I wouldn't even known. So, I mean, it's things like that that will definitely help bridge the gap, between some of the things that I need and what I'm lacking as a parent.
Thank you for that, Kenya. Danielle, I want to hear from you. And Danielle, I'd like you to share with us as you think about some of the areas that would be a support, some of the areas that could be a resource for you as a parent. Those are the kinds of things that help to close the gaps and that I think administrators and school board members would like to know about. So can you tell us a little bit about what you are doing to approach another school year in the pandemic, as well as where you see some opportunities to close the gap?
So basically, I have a 9-year-old son. During this pandemic, he was already in tutoring. I already got a private tutor, which is very taxing. But in order for him to succeed, I have to meet those extra steps. I think that if the school board could possibly fund some of those resources for private tutors, I think you would have a lot of help for some parents. That helped my child tremendously with the private tutoring. And he is continuing tutoring right now. A lot of things. Another thing that his tutor, she's actually a retired Jefferson Parish teacher. She explained to me some things that I didn't know nothing about. That were right there in front of me, those resources, some of those resources. Like, for instance, the children's curriculum. A lot of parents don't know anything about that. They don't know that they can go to the website and just pull up the curriculum to see what's going on with their kid or what they should be learning, or this is what they should be working on. Like I said, communication is key. And I noticed that with his school, communication is horrible. I'm not even gonna lie. Communication is bad. I'm the type of parent who's gonna go to and I'm gonna ask questions. I'm gonna keep asking until I get the answers that I want. And sometimes, I understand that people do get frustrated, and it's hard being a teacher. That's one of the hardest jobs ever. But if we connect the parents to the teachers and we can all get on the same page, I'm telling you, we can make some tremendous strides with our kids. Another thing far as COVID wise, and do I think it's gonna get better? I'm praying that it's gonna get better, but right now I'm looking at the worst. I'm looking at the numbers. I see it every day. That's why I wish that we were on a different level with the school, because even with providing computers for the kids to do some of the things, a lot of parents didn't know how to do a lot of things. And I work in the office every day. Some of the things that they had us to do, I didn't know how to do it on a computer. And so how did you expect my child to do it on his own? So we need to start teaching basic stuff, dealing with computers, so that if we do have to go back into quarantine and back to virtual, just the basic stuff could help the child understand what's going on or continue doing their work. But I'm praying for the best. I seriously doubt that, because it just looks like it's getting worse as far as COVID wise.
Thank you so much, Danielle and Kenya. I think what both of you have said this evening really represents a lot of what we've heard here at the Urban League. There are tremendous concerns about starting a school year in a pandemic. It's a situation that none of us want to be in, but here we are. And how do we make sure that the schools are providing safe environments for those students who are going to be in person? But then at the same time, how do we address the issues of students who have to, once again, rely on distance learning? And so we've got to grapple with those concerns. And it's a lot, but we've got to be very clear that those are real issues, while at the same time, trying not to lose any more ground. And so that is, I know what is on the minds of our school board members who are with us this evening. When we think about education equity and we think about health equity, they are closely related, especially during a pandemic. And so I'd love to hear from our school board members, what is your vision for education equity? What does it really mean? And what can you do as a school board member to help to bring it about? Let's start with Ethan, and then Mary, and then Jasmine, please.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, ensuring that all of our students, no matter what zip code you come from, no matter what your parental situation looks like, that you have the individual services that allows you to truly be able to meet your need and receive what you need to be able to thrive and self-actualize. I think that's the biggest thing that we can do in terms of educational equity, and really individualizing that in a way that takes into account who these individuals are. I mean, there's a lot of parables that talk about, young people in the greatness that exists within them, not being able to be actualized and realized, and how much we as a community miss out on that reality. And so for us, as a district, we're trying to break down as many barriers as possible, whether that's through our differentiated funding formula, whether it's through partnerships with other organizations, or partnerships with our state delegation. I see Representative State Royce Duplessis on, and so folks like that continue to partner with us to make sure that we're able to be successful, to knock down those barriers, stabilize our families, ensure that all of our students receive, the highest quality of supports that they need to be successful in the place that they are in this moment. And I think that that's probably one of the most important things that we can do, is acknowledge where kids are in this moment, provide them with the supports that they need in this moment, such that they are able to be successful, because true equity is giving you what you need, not what the person next to you needs, and not the person to the right of you needs. So that is what we're focused on. That is, and I will acknowledge this, while that is the goal, the true struggle continues to be the lack of resources necessary to be able to do that across the board. I'm sure if I look to my right and my left in terms of my colleagues, we are great prioritizers with dealing with the budgets that we have and the budget constraints that we have. Orleans in particular, running off of 2%, where most districts run off of 6 and 8%. Now, look, I won't go into the details about that, but I will end here and say we owe it to our parents and our families and our educators to do more for our students. And so for us in this moment, my colleagues and I are thinking about the ways that we can scale the things that are working, systemic change, actual scale the things that are working, and try to shed those things that aren't. So I'll put a pause there and let my colleagues chime in. It's been a beautiful discussion. I truly appreciate those who allowed me to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Board Member Ashley. Mary, what does equity in education look like to you in Lafayette?
So what we've done, as Ethan mentioned, we put it on paper. If you want to have a plan of what we're going to do and how we're going to address everybody's needs, all children, we develop a plan, and our plan is called A Pathway to an A District, and it includes all students, students that are high-risk students, students that are doing well. Well, how can we even make them even do better? And I think when you have a plan and you can look at it day by day and be reminded of what you're supposed to be doing. We could talk about things over and over and over until you put it on paper, evaluate what you have on paper. Are we doing this? What is the outcomes? So that's our plan for now. If you go on our website, Lafayette Parish School Board, look at our pathway to an A district. We included tutoring, everything you could possibly think of so that our students could be successful. One thing I wanted to mention that is a challenge for us is students' truancy, absenteeism. Students are not attending school. We could get more students to attend school. They could learn and they would pass. But believe it or not, it was surprising that if you miss 10 or 12 days in a school year, that's a lot. So those are the things that we're looking at, and that's one thing that we're working with our cafe group, our community and family engagement group, see why kids are not attending school. Hopefully the transportation agreement we have with LCG and LPSS will help kids get to where they need to get. You know, sometimes going to school doesn't mean it's just walking distance. Whatever challenge they have, we want to look at and make sure that we meet the needs of the kids and whatever it is. So that's our plan. We put it on paper and we're sticking to it. It's kind of like our Bible. This is what we're doing. We're not going to talk about it and we're going to evaluate it. This is what you said you're going to happen. And it could be like a 2 or 3 year plan and say, this is what our outcomes will be. We say,
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned the evaluation piece. The education equity framework that the Urban League of Louisiana believes strongly in includes evaluation. If you're not willing to evaluate what you're doing, you'll never know whether or not you're actually accomplishing what you've set out to accomplish, and you can never make changes to make improvements. And so it's critical to have a written plan, as you said. It's critical to evaluate your work. We also think that it is extremely important to disaggregate that data so that you know exactly where the biggest disparities exist, where the gaps are, and again, thinking about education equity, being able to focus those resources and giving those students who need the most. And we know that there are historical reasons why that is the case, but being able to address those disparities in a real and meaningful way. And I'm so excited to have you on this evening because we're looking forward to working with you and others in Lafayette to really start to address some of those issues. So, so glad that you could be with us. Jasmine, Caddo Parish, what
Yes.
is your vision for education equity? What does it look like in Shreveport, in the Shreveport area?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I agree with both board members wholeheartedly. But one thing that I would really like to see is those teachers who are performing excellent in a lot of these schools, those top tier teachers, us looking for some ways to pay them more money and get them in the lower performing schools to make sure our students get to where they need to be. We tried that one year and it worked out great. We were just not able to keep the money. The money was lacking, so we weren't able to keep that program going. But that was one thing that I've been discussing with the superintendent, is when you have those teachers who really get in and perform. I mean, you know, that to me, that's a thing that we need to go towards. But other than that, definitely want to provide any resources that we can to help our parents. And I appreciate the parents for that are on here today, because I actually took a few notes here. You know, making sure that we provide them with those resources and keeping that line of communication open, as the Miss Gray said. I'm glad you said that, because we have so many devices that we're paying for every month or every year, and we might not be using them to our best advantages, because we have a parent resource center. You know, we have these things that parents can take advantage of, but just making sure that, you know, that we're number one, we're safe, and getting our students who are who I fight for just about every day, who are high poverty, getting them the resources that they need just to be equipped to go to school. We're actually pushing in school learning this year, along with, and this is what I was going to say, our kids, if they're not in school, they cannot participate in any curricular activities. That's out. So I was kind of glad to see that, you know, in such a way that means that, you know, the kids won't be able to play any football, any drama club, any of that, unless they are in school. So we do offer a virtual option, but you can't participate in any curricular activities. But you know, just to make sure that, you know, our resource, we provide the resources for our students in those high poverty areas is something that, you know, I want to see this year, and we work towards getting, you know, to our premier place with that.
Well, I want to say thank you to each of you for participating. We are a few minutes past our time. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and your expertise with us. I want to especially thank our parents, Danielle Gray and Kenya Cohen, for sharing their expertise. Oftentimes we forget that lived experience is probably in many cases the most valuable expertise that we can tap into. And so having both of you bring your professional and your personal perspectives to this conversation is very, very important. Important to us at the Urban League, and I know that it matters to these school board members that are participating on this panel. Just a couple of closing remarks. The Urban League of Louisiana, in partnership with the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus, is going to be hosting a statewide listening tour. It starts on Monday. It will take place the week of August 16th and the week of August 23rd, and maybe even on Monday, August the 30th. It is going to be virtual because of the situation with COVID-19, but we will be moving around the state of Louisiana virtually, and we want to hear from you. So please, everybody who's participating this evening, we have a host of topics that we want to engage you around, and we want to hear from you. We need your expertise in order to design programming and to direct our advocacy efforts. So please pay attention to that. You can go to our website to learn about how to sign up for the city that is closest to you. Also want to thank Nicole Jolly, who is our Vice President for Engagement and Strategy. She produced this town hall this evening, and I want to thank her. Also Ginger LeBlanc, who is the Urban League of Louisiana's Communications Director, and Jonathan Barnes, who is one of our Communications Associates. They are a stellar communications team, and they work very, very hard to pull together all of the background information that make town halls like this successful. We had a great turnout this evening. We got great comments. I'm sorry that we were not able to speak to every comment and get to every question, but we have videotaped this, we're capturing this, and we will figure out a way to try to get responses to some of the issues that you've raised tonight, probably particularly during our Listen and Learn tour. So that might be a good reason for you to participate in the closest Listen and Learn tour visit with the Urban League of Louisiana. Wishing everyone a great evening.